Well, hello everybody out there. This is Garrett from 11 Bang Bang. Today's video was supposed to be a review of the Thompson Center Renegade, and that video will be coming out next week. However, I've had several comments about a subject, the one you've seen in the title, about whether or not I load 5 or 6. Alright, so let me explain this to you right off the bat. Let me pull this up. This is Cimarron Thunderer. Different video, of course. Not like an original Thunderer, but it's also a very good everyday carry gun just because of its size, and this bird's head grips helps with everyday carry. Now, just so I can prove to you what I'm saying here, I do only load 5. Count them. 1, whoops, 2, 3, 4, 5, no more. I only carry 5 because the way I was taught to do it and the way I do it, when you go to load one of these guns, you load one, skip one, load 4 more, cock the hammer all the way back, and when you place the hammer down, the hammer is all the way down, firing pin on an empty chamber. Now, when I talk about loading 6, what I'm talking about is loading all 6 and then pulling the hammer back to the safety notch position. That's how they were meant to be carried. That safety notch is pretty strong. We'll talk about that later. If you want to carry 6, when I say carry 6, I'm not talking about carrying it with the hammer all the way down, firing pin on a primer. I am talking about that right there. You see that little gap? That is carrying it on the safety notch. If it was all the way down, it would look like that. All the way down, safety notch. When it comes to Colt single action armies, I load 5. Always have, always will. For me, it's just the way I was trained, the way I was taught to do it, the way I will do it. But this is kind of in response to a video that Plowboy's Ghost channel made the other day, where he was talking about, I believe it was on his charcoal blue single action army, and he was talking about whether or not to use the safety notch, and he actually showed a picture from the 1800s of a cowboy who obviously had his single action army in the holster on the safety notch. And so a few weeks ago I made a video where I said this. Alright, so we are going to do the cowboy load, and of course you all know what that means. You don't have to necessarily. A lot of people say you absolutely have to. There is a safety notch on these guns that you could use. I'm not going to get into that debate right now, but a lot of times you find historically that even though we talk about everybody using the cowboy load, if you look at a lot of the shootings, you'll find that there are few too many bullets being fired for everybody to be using the cowboy load. So, but safety first. You want it to make sure it will never fire when you're not ready, put that hammer down on an empty. Now obviously I got a little bit of hate on that video from a lot of people who were kind enough to explain to me that in cowboy action shooting, the SAS rules explain that you have to load 5. Thank you very much. I was not aware of the SAS rules. I'm just kidding. I'm absolutely aware of them. I don't let what happens in a game inform me of my history, okay guys? It's a good idea to load 5. Like I said, I load 5. But just because that's the rules of a game doesn't mean that's the way it was always done, or maybe for some people the way it should be done. I have videos on the channel here explaining why I carry a single action army, and I'll link that in the description along with the video from Plowboy's Ghost and several others. But some people do carry a single action army, and it might behoove them to carry 6. It's one more round, you know, if that's their self-defense weapon. But I'm not going to chew on somebody who does carry 6 because they use the safety notch. Now, a lot of the idea of carrying 5 is what we call the John Wayne load. My absolute favorite actor of all time, but it was either Shootist or True Grit, I can't remember off the top of my head, but he talked about loading 5 instead of 6 for safety's sake, and that became known as the John Wayne or the cowboy load. And now it is what YouTubers and everybody else lives by religiously. Now, a lot of people have told me down through the years that you should always carry 5 and on an empty because that's the way Colt says to do it. That's the way all the cowboys did it, and that's the way the military did it. I'm sorry, I'm just not seeing that in the history, guys. You know me, I'm a huge history of the handguns of Colt buff. I got all those books. That doesn't look like a huge library there, guys, but that's because every one of those books is on the history of the Colt company. There's probably 5,000 pages altogether I got over there about it, and I read on it all the time. You know, even the little blue books here, and I got books over there. That's my main shelf. I got a filing cabinet. You can't see it though. It's right down there underneath that John Wayne picture. And I've come across a lot of gunfights where you will find that both of the combatants discharged their revolvers all the way till they emptied them, and 12 shots were fired. Few too many for people to be carrying the cowboy load. Once again, I'm not dissing the idea that you should only load 5. I only load 5. But let's take a look at this historically. I'm going to be using today my book, A History of the Colt Revolver by Haven and Belden. My favorite go-to Colt book. Got a lot of information in there, a lot of advertisements, all the Colt testings from the Patterson, you know, all the way through to, I believe this book goes up into the 1940s. And it's a very good book. As you can see, my pages are falling out because I have been in this book countless hours. Whoops, there goes a whole section of it. Countless hours over the past several years. I've worn it out. I need to get it rebound. But let me just turn over here to page 399, which is actually a 2-page advertising sheet on the Single Action Army and the new line. And this is actually from 1876, so 3 years into production, when we should be having all these discharges going off because people are carrying it with 6 on the safety notch. Holding the pistol in the left hand, muzzle downwards, half cock it with the right hand and open the gate. Second motion, insert the cartridges in succession with the right hand, close the gate, cock and fire it, taking it in the right hand, or bring the hammer to the safety notch as may be desired. So we know that at least 3 years into production, Colt is still telling people to use the safety notch and load all 6. So let's go forward just a little bit in time, and we have another advertisement here. This is from 1884. Advertisement in 1884 for Colt's new model Army metallic cartridge revolver. So this is well over 11 years into production. And they say then, notice there are 3 notches in the hammer of this pistol. The first is the safety notch, the second is the half-cock notch, and the third is the full-cock notch. The pistol cannot be fired when the hammer is resting in the safety notch or the half-cock notch, and can be fired by pulling the trigger when the hammer is in the full-cock notch. This pistol should be carried habitually with the hammer resting in the safety notch. 1884, guys. They're still telling you you can load all of them and you can carry it with a safety notch. Alright, so here we are. How about 1898 for the Colt single action Bisley model? By now you would think that we're nearing the end of the 19th century. We should be hearing about all these cases of people dropping their stirrup onto the hammer and the gun going off. Or we should at least be hearing about some lawsuits, because I guarantee you, even in that time period, that if someone had accidentally shot themselves in the leg, or a negligent discharge of a gun that was carried on the safety notch had killed someone, they would be suing Colt left and right if this was such an issue. Let's look at the Colt Bisley model from 1898. It says, this revolver is an improvement of the single action Army, having a longer handle and a firmer grip. Also in design, trigger, lock work, which have been changed to produce a light, smooth action. All of these improvement points have been introduced without sacrificing the accuracy, simplicity, and durability of the popular single-action Army revolver. These revolvers should be carried with the hammer resting in the safety notch. So, 1898, Colt saying, guess what? Carry it in the safety notch, and you can load all 6. That's basically what they're saying right there. Let's move on forward a little farther, shall we? I mean, this gun goes a long ways. Alright, so here's an advertisement from Colt for the single action Army revolver, the Frontier Model 6-shooter, 6-shot single action from 1940. This is at the very end of the Colt single action Army's first run production. So by now they should have had a few lawsuits, wouldn't you think? They shouldn't be advertising anymore that you can carry it on the safety notch with 6. 1940, here we go. Essentially a belt, shoulder, or saddle holster arm, and always popular with big game hunters as a complementary arm to rifles of the same caliber, this is the model that blazed the trail west of the Mississippi. May be safely carried with the hammer in the safety notch. That's the full run, guys. That is the full run of the Colt single action Army, all the way from its very first advertisements in '76 when they really started letting the civilians get them. Civilians could get them before, but most of them were going to the military for the first 3 years. And every one of those advertisements, guess what? Carry it on the safety notch. Now there is definitely a recorded story in Dodge City, Kansas, not very far down the road. And I'm not bringing the book up right now because it's not actually here. It's over at the studio. But there's a story of Wyatt Earp loading his pistol with all 6, dropping the pistol on the floor. It goes off, shoots a mirror out. And for a lot of people, that is the end all, because they'll tell you, you know what? Wyatt Earp loaded his pistol with all 6, put it down like that, and it went off, evidently broke the safety notch, shot a mirror out. Well, if you do a little more research into that, you will find that that was a cap and ball pistol. Yes, he did not have it on the safety notch between chambers on a cap and ball pistol. Cap and ball pistol only has 3 notches, no safety notch. He had it all the way down on a cap. He went to stand up or sit down, one or the other, hooked his pistol in the arm of the chair, raised it up out of the holster, dropped it on the floor, hammer hit the percussion cap, which it was resting on, discharged it, shot the mirror. So that has absolutely nothing to do with carrying 5 or 6 in a single action Army. I'm sorry. It does not have anything to do with it. That was a completely different action, completely different revolver. When you're on the safety notch, the firing pin does not protrude. When you're not on the safety notch, if you can't see it in there, ooh, very little bit. Yep, the firing pin protrudes. Now, the question is, can you break that safety notch off? Now let's go back and talk about the military trials. Everybody tells me that the reason that people should carry 5 and not 6 is because in the first U.S. military trials, they broke the safety notch and the gun misfired or discharged, however you want to call it nowadays. It seems like everybody's using misfired the wrong way. Let's go back and let's take a look at the actual ordnance report. This revolver is supplied with a safety notch on which it can be carried without the firing pin touching the cartridge. The other parts are essentially the same as the old model. Colt's revolver was first fired 300 rounds with the service ammunition, allowing it to cool after each 100 rounds. No difficulty was experienced with it, and only one cartridge failed to explode. This one was found to be defective and fulminate. The revolver was then laid in the snow, water poured over it, and it was allowed to remain in the weather 3 days and nights. When taking up again, it was rusted considerably, but worked perfectly. It was again fired up to 200 rounds, with 2 cartridges failing to explode. One of these exploded at a second trial, and the other with a punch and a hammer. The Colts and one of Smith & Wesson's were then fired for accuracy at 50 yards. A target of 10 shots with each gave mean absolute deviation. For Colts, 3.1 inches. For Smith & Wesson, 4.39 inches. Both revolvers were then placed in a closed box connected with a pulverizer and well sanded. The sand did not affect the working of either. They were then fired at 25 yards distance for penetration. The average penetration for 10 shots with each was the Colt 4.1 inches, Smith & Wesson 3.35. The Smith & Wesson was then fired 100 rounds and the Colt's 200 rounds. No difficulty was experienced with either, only a slight increase in friction being noticeable in the Smith & Wesson. 1 cartridge failed to explode in the Colt and 8 in the Smith & Wesson. The one failing in the Colt was exploded with a center punch. 6 of those failing in the Smith & Wesson were exploded at a second trial, and 1 in a third trial. The other one was without fulminate. Now, here's where things get interesting. Before firing with Leets cartridges, by snapping the Colt's revolver without pressing the trigger, I broke off the point of the half-cock notch. An examination of this part discovered a distinct flaw in it. Now that's all the further I'm going to go because he doesn't talk about it anymore. The gun did not discharge. Do you know why? Because it caught in the safety notch. That piece broke off of there because the guy was thumbing it back, kind of like Alec Baldwin, letting go, and guess what? It did. It malfunctioned. It broke the half-cock notch. Of course, by breaking that half-cock notch, it slowed down the momentum. There was no way it was going to break that safety notch. And the piece had an obvious and very distinct flaw in it. He makes note of that. By the way, this is by John R. Eddy, Captain of Ordnance. This is the test of September 3rd of 1873. Is it possible to break that safety notch? To have it hit with a rock, to be thrown from a horse and have your holster or something hit a rock and smash through that safety notch and break and cause the gun to discharge into your leg? Anything is possible. We always say that. Is it likely? Not really. How about the stories we've all heard? And I don't blame anybody who's told this story because it's been told hundreds of times. You know, everybody on the internet's had an uncle that did this, where they have the gun in the holster and they're saddling their horse, put the stirrup up over the horn so they can tighten the cinch. Stirrup falls off the horn, hits the hammer, breaks the safety notch, discharges the gun, shoots them in the leg. Like I said, no lawsuits ever stating this, but you know, we've heard about it a lot. How heavy would that stirrup have to be? How hard would you have to hit that rock if you were thrown from your horse and the hammer hits a rock, breaks the safety notch? Well, I'm not an expert in this, but let's talk to the Wild Snapper, who has a history of metalwork, and he studies this kind of thing, engineering of metal pieces and things like that extensively. Let's hear what he has to say about it.
I kind of got on this around the same time Plowboy did, and Plowboy also he's kind of the person who made me want to stand up and actually go, okay, at least there's one more person than me, so I'll get the bravery to come out and say it. I do engineering. I love engineering, and in engineering it's just math, and with a computer you can type in numbers and you can get numbers. It's very simple. It's not biased. You can make something, and then like this single action army is made of good steel, even in 1882. I replicated the hammer on a single action army, and the trigger mechanism and the pins, the whole 9 yards, replicated it in CAD. And then I did a spectrum analysis on it, on what it takes to break it. So this safety notch is so strong. And when I did this, I used the crappiest steel, just low-grade, soft, mild steel, not hardened, nothing. And it took anywhere between 800 and 1,000 foot-pounds of pressure to break the safety notch. And it didn't break the safety notch. It actually started to shear the trigger pin, the pin that holds the trigger in. And it would actually start to shear it downward. And you had to add another about 50 to 100 foot-pounds, depending on, to actually for a catastrophic break. So that means if I had this with 6 rounds in it and I dropped it, it would take about 15 feet of it landing perfectly on its nose, you know, right on the tip of the hammer, to break that safety notch for the gun to fire. And it still might not fire. You just might bend it. And I was using crappy steel, and that's not talking about the steel that are in these guns. And if you're talking about the steel in the modern guns, like if you had a brand new Cimarron or something, you're probably looking closer to 1,500 to 1,800 pounds to break that safety notch. That means you got to throw it extremely hard or drop it from a couple stories. Like I said, I use the softest steel to replicate if there's the worst gun in the world, for some weird reason something happened and it lost its temper and it was just crappy, it would take a minimum of 800 foot-pounds to break that safety notch.
All right, so we've been through all that. What's my conclusions on this? Well, for the first 100 years of production, I don't think the cowboy load was as big a thing as we make it out to be. They load 5 and keep 1 empty. I think people did exactly what they were told to do. You know, when someone who'd never handled a gun walked into the gun store like they do today and they asked the clerk, can I buy this gun? Would you show me how it works? That clerk would have took the gun, showed him how you load it, probably not with live shells, probably had some dummy shells there in hand. Anybody that knew what they were talking about would have then said, according to Colt, here's the list. It probably came in the box the gun came with, because most of the boxes came with a list of instructions in the lid. They say, follow the instructions. The instructions say you take the gun, place it on half cock, open the chamber, use this hand to rotate the cylinder around, load all 6, and then very carefully place the hammer in the safety notch. That's how they were designed to do. That's how they were advertised to do. That's how they were sold to do. Now, let's talk about one more thing here before we go. I know it's a long video. The Cattleman 2 system. I have one right here. You can see brass grip frame. By the way, that could have been done historically, and there are Colts in museums that have brass grip frames. Most of them were changed out by a gunsmith. I'm not sure that any of them came from the factory that way. We assume not, but you know, you never know, because that could be fit with a 51 Navy grip. But a few of them did have brass grip frames, at least in their later years. Now on this gun, let me show you one more time. Here is the original style Colt. Even though this is a replica, it still has 4 clicks. Here are all 4 of those. Alright, here's the Cattleman 2 system. Just 3. No safety notch. Technically speaking, this gun does not need a safety notch. It has a system in here where a bar is connected to the back of the trigger. Alright, now look at the top inside the frame where that blue book is. When I pull the trigger, you see that? Between the frame and the cylinder, when I pull the trigger, the firing pin comes forward. That's because this is a safety system that does not supposedly require you to carry only 5 or whatever, and does not utilize the safety notch. I don't like this system that much. I like the gun a lot, and I'm going to do a review on it real soon. The system is fine, providing you keep your gun absolutely clean and probably don't shoot black powder. If you get fouling behind that firing pin and it sticks forward, like I've heard of it doing, then once again, you have a gun that you need to carry 5 in, but you no longer have a safety notch. So, you know, I'm not a big fan of the system. It works. It, for all purposes, people that keep their guns clean, works just fine. And some people love this system. I don't like it that much, but you know what? I don't hate it. It works for people who want to casually carry 6 like they were going to have a Ruger or something. So anyway, the crux of the matter is it safe to carry 6? In my opinion, it's perfectly safe to carry 6 and carry it on the safety notch. Do I do that? No. It's not the way I was trained, not the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to carry 5. I have never ran into a situation where I needed more than 5. But that's me. That's not everyone else. If somebody else wants to carry 6, they can do that on safety notch, and I won't get on to them because history tells us it was done for over 100 years that way. And I feel that it's absolutely perfectly safe to do that way today. Now, is it safer to carry 5? Yes. Just like if you take your Glock today and you carry it without one in the chamber, and if you get in a situation, you rack the slide and put one in. Is that safer? Yes. Is it better? Not in my opinion. Because that's an extra, if you get into a shooting situation, that's an extra move you have to do. It's a little faster with a single action because all you got to do is cock the hammer, which you have to do anyway. But what's the difference? You say the Glock's safer. Maybe, maybe not. Supposing something's sticking on the side of your holster and you miss the holster, or you accidentally forget in the high tense situation, put your finger in the trigger while you're holstering your gun and it goes off and shoots you in the leg. It's happened over and over again. Probably happened more times than one of these that was on the safety notch went off and shot somebody in the leg. Videos all over the internet. Finger in the trigger guard on a Glock. They push against their finger, gun goes off, shoots them in the leg.
Okay, I'm the only one in this room professional enough that I know of to carry this Glock 40. I'm the only one. No, is everybody all right?
For some reason, the off-duty officer draws his weapon while in the elevator with his wife. Jewett then has trouble reholstering the handgun, and the next thing he knows is he's caught lead.
So yeah, Nobody out there is carrying their Glock on an empty chamber. If you've got a 4-click hammer, there's no reason why you can't carry 6, in my opinion, other than that's the way you were trained and you feel safer. If you have one of these 4-click hammers, once again, I'm going to say, for safety's sake, I personally carry 5. But I'm not going to get on to anybody who carries 6 with it in the safety notch. That's the way your grandpa probably really did do it. So, without further ado, trust in God, keep your powder dry. Bye.